if the global economy wasn't melting down, I do feel like this would be like the biggest story in Washington, which is that this fringe right-wing conspiracy theory lunatic named Laura Loomer is, according to all these news reports and according to her own Twitter feed, making major national security personnel decisions. So just a quick 101 on Laura Loomer. Listeners might remember the time she literally chained herself to Twitter's office door in New York to protest getting banned from the platform. I don't know if you remember this, Ben. She was wearing a Star of David at the time to compare her treatment by Twitter to that of the Jews during the Holocaust. Seems comparable.
Seems like someone who has things in perspective.
Yeah, she said 9/11 was an inside job. She celebrated the deaths of Muslim refugees who drowned while trying to cross the Mediterranean, including children. I think she tweeted the clapping hands emoji, saying more of that. She's just a truly vile person. But despite all of that context, last week, Donald Trump took 30 minutes out of his day on Liberation Day of all days to meet with Laura Loomer, where I guess she ranted in the Oval Office about the loyalty of various national security staffers and did it in front of Trump, Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and J.D. Vance, who I believe is still the vice president, although it's not clear, it might be Elon Musk. The next day, the firings began, including the senior director for intelligence, the NSC Leg Affairs person, the senior director for technology and national security, the senior director for international organizations, and then later Timothy D. Howe, the head of the National Security Agency, or NSA, and also U.S. Cyber Command, along with Wendy Noble, his deputy. So, Ben, I just want to make sure our listeners understand how senior and influential these positions are. Obviously, like people have probably heard of the NSA. That is the organization in charge of collecting signals intelligence. They intercept phone calls and emails, et cetera. They're probably responsible for 75-80% of the intelligence consumed by, policymakers. They also conduct offensive cyber operations. That leadership was decapitated. And then the NSC roles, like those are also incredibly influential. Like the NSC Senior Director for Intelligence is the person in the White House overseeing the intelligence agencies, covert action programs, all like the most sensitive details, sources and methods, collection technology, like all the shit I don't even know anymore. That person's gone thanks to Laura Loomer. This is like, it's almost funny because it's so absurd, but it's really chilling stuff because these people, is she going to get to pick who comes next? We have no idea.
It's a truly troubling story because what it tells you is that in the second iteration of the Trump administration, he is listening to this wing of his party on everything.
There's no Jim Mattis in there.
There's no Jim Mattis. There's no H.R. McMaster. There's no, even Mike Pompeo, who's, as any listeners to this show will know, we're no fans of Mike Pompeo. Part of what's going on here is that when Trump staffed up his administration, you'll remember that they didn't like these kind of extreme MAGA people like Laura Loomer, didn't like the Rubio choice for state. They wanted Rick Grinnell. They wanted a true MAGA guy in there. Grinnell didn't get the job. Pour one out for Rick Grinnell. But they got kind of, there's like a, scattering of lunatics around the national security enterprise. And then you get Mike Waltz. And then there's this guy, Alex Wong, who's the deputy national security advisor, who is like a pretty conventional right-winger. He worked for Tom Cotton in the Senate. He worked in the first Trump administration on, I think, Korea issues. And he's seen as, by the Loomers of the world, suspiciously conventional.
Yeah, she went after him, but didn't
she
get
went
that
after
scalp.
him, didn't get a scalp. But all these people were kind of, I talked to people in Washington, these were like the Alex Wong people at the NSC, the kind of professionals.
His coaching tree.
And by the way, not people that you and I agree on about most things. They're kind of neocons or they're kind of hard-ass China hawks, but they're just not lunatics. They're just not like burn it all down, Laura Loomer type, foreign policy people, or even they're not like the J.D. Vance flavor.
Yeah, they live in reality.
They live in reality, And so the first thing that this tells you is that Trump, one meeting with Laura Loomer, and suddenly he's just clearing the brush of anybody that isn't kind of MAGA pilled completely, even if they're pretty hard right wingers, right? Then if you look at the jobs there, and as you say, the NSA, the director of the National Security Agency, his head rolled the next day too. So you're talking about the people in charge of intelligence, the National Security Agency, signals intelligence, people in the NSC that are responsible for things like export controls that sound wonky, but that's basically how do sensitive technologies, military technologies, AI move out into the world. Massive portfolios that are just left empty so that he can appease and give a scalp to Laura Loomer. By the way, at the exact same time that he upends the American relationship with every country in the world through tariffs, he then fires some of the people that would normally have to come in behind and try to clean up that mess and figure things out. Never mind that these are also the people that are in charge of some of the most sensitive issues like AI and intelligence relationships. So
And Mike Waltz, their boss, is so embarrassed and neutered by the Signalgate scandal and inviting Jeffrey Goldberg to be in all his little chats about classified information that he can't defend them.
Well, if you think about it now, you've got Marco Rubio, who's basically an intern at the State Department, right? You've got Mike Waltz, who, he literally just got neutered because he argued against firing these people, and these are his staff, and Laura Loomer fired them, basically. Yep. Who's in charge?
No idea.
It's Trump. It's just Trump and what's in his head and who he just talked to. And then it's J.D. Vance, who seems to have kind of wiggled his way into foreign policy pretty effectively. It's Steve Witkoff, who is accepting paintings of Donald Trump from Vladimir Putin.
And leading the Iran talks.
And leading the Iran talks.
We're going to get into.
It's Pete Hegseth, who is, trying to get rid of women in combat.
He's just doing burpees, having a good time.
And like dropping emojis into signal chats. Like it's Trump, Vance, Hegseth, Witkoff. Like this is real crazy town at a time when there are wars going on, tariffs, trade wars. There could be a global recession. Not good. Not good.
But also, I think it's good to highlight this and to watch this stuff, because if there is an intelligence failure or something bad happens, something slips through the cracks, like we absolutely all need to point to this bloodletting from Laura Loomer that pushed out all these competent people and created chaos in the midst of, as you mentioned, like an economic crisis, and God knows what else is happening behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Yeah. And can I bring one more scary thing to this conversation, since I guess it's that kind of day, post-Liberation Day? The Trump presidency just happens to align with the 4 years in which AI is going to move out into the world.
Yep.
That's already troubling enough. These were the kind of semi-adults that were going to competently manage that. Now they're gone. Like, who's in charge of this? We could have an economic crisis that is followed by mass economic and job displacement from AI, followed by like an AI arms race in the world between American and Chinese AI. You would think you would want some competent people just kind of running this store, because Trump probably doesn't have strong views on these things. And so that's just another thing to watch.